Hungry. It was unusually crowded at the Williamsburg Food Stamp Center, especially for a Wednesday. All of the people standing or sitting, if they were lucky enough to score a hard seat, had been told that Wednesday was a light traffic day, which is why they were all here on this day rather than the day before or the day after. Only those who had never waited for benefits were stupid enough to make the trip to stand in line on a Monday or a Friday. On a Monday-Friday, you could wait in line all day and not see a caseworker. And even if you did manage to get to the promised window, the chance that the jaded caseworker would lose or bungle your paperwork was magnified tenfold on those days. This particular Wednesday was as crowded as any Monday, but that did not deter a pack of small children from playing a wild game of tag that involved running at top speed up and down the center of the packed waiting room. The children were quick and brown and bold. They called each other rude names and laughed if one of them tripped over a foot of one of the adults standing on the margins of the seating area, shifting from one foot to the other in uncomfortable shoes. Nobody could catch the children, certainly not their mothers, who simply ignored them. The room was mostly filled with black or brown or acidic faces. There were a few notable exceptions on this day. The most remarkable was a middle-aged white woman sitting in the left front row. Her tightly hunched shoulders radiated tension, but it was her stillness that gave her away. You could see in the frozen quality of her stillness that she really did not know what to do with herself now that everything had changed. She pretended to study her book, but really she was watching the room full of people. There were so many interesting faces and shapes. If only she were a part of them, she would have enjoyed making sketches to take back to her studio to sculpt in clay or plasticine. In a simpler, less militarized time, she had loved to sit at the airport on one of her days off, pretending to be a mother waiting for her daughter's plane to arrive. She would sketch people arriving and departing. Everybody could afford to travel back then, all types and shapes and colors of people. She liked the holiday travelers best. She watched them stagger onto the plane, bearing awkward gifts for family. The people heading for winter resorts would come to the airport dressed in flip-flops and shorts, their legs blue from the cold, and they reminded her of migrating birds fleeing the starvation of winter. The winter light as it streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the airport terminal was clear and luminous. Some of her most interesting sculptures had resulted from her airport surveillance. But the fluorescent light in the waiting room was too bright and universally flat, erasing every shadow so that objects and people looked one-dimensional to her. It was an interesting problem for a sculptor, and she found herself thinking about the difficulty of a flat reality. Of course, she knew that this flatness was an illusion. It was the unnatural light, she decided, that warped visuality, flattening the spatial relationships between objects in her field of vision. The uniformity of the fluorescent light erased texture and depth. It did not help that every surface was reflective in some way, and the room lacked any objects made from natural materials such as wood, stone, or clay. The chairs were made of chrome and molded plastic in primary colors. The floor was that cheap linoleum that lovingly holds on to every footprint and splatter of food. The three-board receptionists were barricaded behind a tall sectional made of plastic veneer that simulated the wood-grain desks of their supervisors. The veneer on the window station in front of her rippled where somebody had spilled coffee, causing the veneer to curl up to reveal the particle board just below the surface. Her hair was dark and her skin was pale and fine. She might have been acidic if she'd been less alone, if she had not been dressed in jeans and a trimmed sweater. She looked good for her age and could pass for a much younger woman if you did not look too closely. She had not turned a page in the last hour of waiting, and she wasn't fooling anybody. When the heavy woman next to her got up, a man's voice, deep and lilting, said, "Is this seat available?" And she looked up at him, her eyebrows arched and ready, but the golden brown warmth of his eyes stopped her. To her own astonishment, she nodded yes and made a welcoming gesture in the direction of the seat next to her. He doesn't hide anything, she thought, looking at his face. And it was true that he had an open, eloquent face that changed expression quickly, easily in the seconds that passed as she studied his face. He had generous laugh lines around his eyes. I wonder what makes him laugh, she thought. She knows where all the exits are, he thought as she sat down, placing a weathered leather satchel between his chair and hers. He pulled out a journal and a pen and looked around the room expectantly. She pretended to read again, which allowed her to watch him surreptitiously. He watched the room for a few moments, studied it just as she had. He uncapped the pen and lightly tapped the paper with the felt tip. The applicant, the laughing children, the guards seemed to flow around him like water. He began to draw with a bold, sure line into his journal. She studied his movements, glancing sideways at the page. Now she could recognize the angry receptionist stuffed into a polyester sweater 2 sizes too small for her. Another fluid movement of his hand, and she could see the outline of the double baby carriage next to her, and the girl's soothing hand on the carriage handlebar. Mother or sibling, she wondered, glancing at the real-life model. It was impossible for her to tell, but the man's eloquent line knew the answer. An elder sister, daydreaming about her family-to-be as she rocked her youngest sister to sleep. The drawing revealed the girl's straight hair, the severity of her long black skirt topped by a boxy striped sweater. The focal point of the portrait was the sad femininity of the black velvet headband that held the girl's dark hair in place. He saw things she had not seen. Each receptionist had a fresh pink rose soaking in a plastic cup next to her computer. The guard with glasses limped slightly on his left side. Again the artist's pen scratched across the paper and she could see herself. A timid look through overgrown bangs. Her roots were showing. The artist had drawn her hair in bold black lines to highlight the exposed silvery roots like a chasm within her head, slowly, inexorably being filled with the emptiness of the white space around her. She was so thin, much thinner than before the layoffs. She looked untethered, almost wispy like a hollow reed. She looked frightened. She looked old. God, was she really that ugly? Is that how he saw her? Is that how everyone saw her? She did not want anyone to look at her. She found that she couldn't breathe in the stale air, which she knew beyond doubt had been recycled through too many bodies, too many rambling tales of woe. She crammed her book into her bag and gathered her scarf and gloves. She desperately wanted to leave. Her glove with the hole in the thumb kept dropping out of her hands to the floor. If it fell one more time, she was going to leave it there. The artist was looking at her with an amused half-smile. "Do I make you uncomfortable?" he said to her. "Hardly. I just don't like your amateurish drawing. Keep it to yourself, all right?" She left the glove on the floor and retreated to the back of the room to stand, but she could not find a space to squeeze into the line and lean against the cinder block wall. She stood there, half in the line and half out of it, clutching her coat to her chest. Her number was announced over the system. She was sent to the first window directly in front of the artist. She could feel his eyes reading her shoulders. The receptionist barely looked at her paperwork. "Turn left, go down the hallway to the elevator, go to the waiting room in 314 on the 3rd floor. Your caseworker is Mr. Sims in room 316. Wait in the reception area in 314 until he is ready to see you." She felt him behind her. "Miss, you dropped your glove." And he set her glove on the receptionist's counter. "Thank you," she replied tersely, too embarrassed to look at him. She grabbed her glove and exited left as she had been told to do. The waiting room in 314 looked exactly like the waiting room downstairs, but where the room downstairs had been overflowing with people, this room was nearly empty. She found that the room's emptiness was even more depressing to her, and it was cold in this room. There was a draft coming from an open window that she could not see. She was given a 10-page form, which she filled out with a number 2 pencil. She returned both to the room attendant when she was finished. Soon her number was called, and she was directed to an unmarked door. On the other side of the door was a large and cavernous room that echoed with voices. There were rows and rows of cubicles separated by half walls. Each cubicle had a number on a placard that extended like a road sign from the half wall. Her caseworker's number was 26. Her caseworker liked to keep his work area tidy. He gestured to the straight-back metal chair next to his desk. She sat down and crossed her legs, suppressing the nervous flutter in her stomach. She tried to slow her breathing consciously as she had been taught in sports club yoga classes, but still she felt lightheaded. She had eaten her daily bowl of stone-ground oatmeal and the last of the raisins this morning. She had enough oats for 2 more meals. She could feel the oatmeal like a lump of indigestible coal in her stomach. Her caseworker had a theory about benefit recipients. Everyone has a story, meaning that everyone lies. He looked at her file resting on the desk in front of her. Jesus, she already had a file. He picked up a gold metal cross pen and turned to scrutinize her. "Please confirm your name and Soch." "Soch?" she asked. "Social Security," he elaborated, speaking slowly as if she were hard of hearing. She told him. He checked a box in the form in her file. Are you married, divorced, single? Single. Any children or other dependents? No. Has your boyfriend served time, or does he have a record? She hesitated, and she could see the caseworker lean in, suddenly eager. Is there anyone in your household with a federal record? Anyone who has been banned from receiving food benefits due to fraud? What could she say? She was still sore from the last time that he had entered her. But he didn't stay. He never stayed, and she did not know when she would see him next. His wife had grown suspicious, or so he had told her. She closed her eyes, and she could see him lounging on her sofa, easy in his clothes, the late afternoon sun illuminating the sharp angles and strong planes that made up his beautiful face. Her caseworker waited impatient. Well, for cases. They either talked so much that he wanted to scream, or they wouldn't answer the damn questions. Did they honestly think that he cared? He tapped out a complicated rhythm with his pen. They had been at work, where it was easy to fabricate reasons to stay late. The layouts came in unpredictable waves. She was caught in the third round, while he was promoted. He felt guilty. He helped her, at first. Her dependency on his occasional gifts bothered her more than it bothered him. HR had told her that she was redundant, and she knew it to be true. Ma'am, these are not optional questions. Please do not waste my time. I live alone. Does your boyfriend hit you? He asked, his pencil poised over a portion of the benefit application form that had its own special box within a larger boxed-in section. She looked at him. I am very obedient, she said. She checked the box and moved on.